I need support staff to clear the room. Stand up and walk, now.
Hello and welcome to The Watch. My name is Chris Ryan. I am an editor at TheRinger.com. And joining me in the studio to smoke darts and talk about our moms, it's Andy Greenwald!
That's very true. I'm just taking it in. I'm
man.
just getting used to your musk
Here
again.
I am.
It's been a minute.
Tanned and toned by the Pacific Northwest, but I return to Loser Angeles to deliver a prestige television podcast like none other. Greenwald, it's great to see you.
You do the work.
A little bit of housekeeping.
All right.
The Watch at Spotify.com to email us. The Watch Pod _ on Instagram to follow us.
Are we getting a lot of emails?
No, not since the pit. Nobody writes us.
Not even.
And it's actually kind of embarrassing. I hear all these other podcasts and they're like, you guys, the inbox is overflowing. Maybe my spam filter's on.
I signed us up for a lot of actual emails.
We're sustaining donors.
So
you can watch us, the Ringer-TV on YouTube or on Spotify, where I hope you listen to us. A little bit of a programming note. Today, Andy and I are going to talk about the last 3 episodes of The Bear season 4, but not the last 3 episodes of The Bear. And then we're also going to chat a little bit about some news and we make a barbecue playlist every summer for July 4th. So we'll chat a little bit about that.
That'll be shared on my public Spotify.
What about your private Spotify?
That's just for you, Doug. those are just the little gems I uncover.
Just you crying to Holocene. And then on Monday, Andy and I are going to talk about the Apple TV show Smoke and the Netflix show The Eternaut. I think that's how you pronounce
Eternaut,
it.
Isn't it?
Eternaut.
I mean, I think it's about being an eternal astronaut. I mean, it sounds different. I mean, in the Argentine accent.
I know. That was the thing is that as a Boca Juniors fan, I was trying to honor them. So those are the next 2 shows we'll be talking about a little bit. We'll see how far we go into them. I haven't checked them out yet, but it's a long weekend.
What about, did you mention that we're going to be fully spoiling the Disney Plus series Ironheart
in
the first 15 minutes of this podcast?
If you have not watched Ironheart, I don't know what to tell you. Because
we're going to tell you something.
Couldn't be me. I definitely watched Ironheart.
You did some of the work.
But first, some news.
Yeah. Well, my first news is I did break your heart because I wanted to follow up on our conversation from our last podcast that maybe I took a little bit more seriously than you, which is a couple things.
You've been house hunting.
It wasn't so much. I think there was a moment in the podcast where I was like, we were like, oh, later in life they live together. I was like, that's us. I was like, I thought that if we ever, God forbid, but
we were talking about Carrie and Miranda.
We were retiring in the second season when we're rebooted on a sort of a lesser Spotify service. That's what we'll do. But our dream took a blow today when I discovered, first of all, I found out that one of the stalwart entertainments of our 20s, the Nintendo 64 game Perfect Dark, I found out today, this is a real roller coaster, was being rebooted for Xbox, and it looked sick AF. But unfortunately, I found out it was being rebooted in the news item that it was being canceled and pulped and never will be released.
Do you think it was canceled because they found some bad tweets by the Perfect Dark characters from a while ago?
Do you think the star of Perfect Dark was Milkshake Ducks? What do you think her politics were? Democratic Socialist? I don't.
It's all up for grabs now.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. You know what I can tell you for sure from my memories of Perfect Dark, that she favors a robust foreign policy.
Yes, she does.
Her domestic agenda is unknown.
You know what? She doesn't mind regime change.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. Bespoke DIY regime change. Great game. Sorry about that. We'll have to find something else to do in our future.
Let's start with probably the biggest news out of television this week.
Non-Bear division.
Non-Bear division. And I read mostly about this in Leslie Goldberg's Ankler newsletter, that Neil Druckmann is stepping away from the television adaptation of the game that he created. Last of Us. Obviously, we had a little bit of a roller coaster with Last of Us this season. Some mixed responses from this jury of 2, but a hung jury, you could say.
Do you think?
And then I found this pretty fascinating. The level of involvement that Druckmann had goes way beyond an executive producer and consultant credit.
True.
He directed several episodes, co-wrote many episodes, or at least more than a few episodes with Craig Mazin. He obviously, one of the sort of major selling points of The Last of Us as a video game is the cinematic cutscenes, the deep narrative, the deep sort of storytelling that the video game comes with. Some people have actually put together like assemblages of those cutscenes to basically be, you can watch a playthrough of the game by going through this. And this is an interesting story. Last of Us is essentially the flagship show of HBO at this point. With Dragon?
Yeah. I mean, I think those are those are certainly their
biggest shows.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I think there's one other really big show coming that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
That's the only one I'm thinking of.
I hope that they don't have an end to the garbage strike in Philadelphia, because I will podcast from a pile of trash for Task.
I feel like that's playing...
I will be the Rat King of Philadelphia.
That's playing into the haters' hands, honestly. Like, the jokes write themselves.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that's worth noting about this news that makes it kind of surprising is, with the full caveat that we know nothing about anything that's gone on behind the scenes. We've never spoken to either of these guys, as far as I know, unless you have like a... Remember the time you were like, yeah, I was just texting with my pal Tracy Letts.
I have not had the honor to do that with Craig Mazin.
How do you communicate? Signal? DM?
We just leave Geiger counters outside of each other's houses.
That's sweet. But the public-facing relationship between Craig Mazin, who is an Emmy reward... Did he win for Chernobyl? I believe he did.
I believe so.
Emmy award-winning prestige television merchant, and Neil Druckmann, who has made this prestige-level video game, was the warmth of the collaboration was part of the public-facing selling point of the show, right? That like this is the best-case scenario for the types of IP stories that HBO are developing, where it's like we can put our best talent together with the medium's best talent and make something that is greater than the sum of its parts, potentially. And it does seem like, for all intents and purposes, that it was a robust back and forth, because there are a lot of things in the show that people have told me, yelled at me, or subtweeted me are essential parts of the game.
Yeah.
And I think that for some people whose investment in the show is based on the game, Druckmann's involvement is a deal maker, right? Like feeling good that there's someone minding the store, because there is a restive segment of fandom that is particularly infuriated when anything that deviates from canon occurs in an adaptation of their beloved property. That's kind of the engine that fuels a lot of anger at the Game of Thrones franchise.
Hey, just not to digress here, but can you think of a single piece of adaptation of a video game property, or really, honestly, like maybe in the last 5 or 6 years, a comic book property where the fandom is like, great job, guys.
You nailed it.
Yeah. That's really everything I thought it could be.
That's a tough one. That's a great question. I mean, I think one of the problems is that the discourse has shifted so strongly that like everybody is catering to the noisiest voices.
Well, they would
and seeking out and like proving their stripes, proving their fidelity to the source material. Even as part of the welcoming those voices and eyeballs and Reddit profiles in on the development process. I think like the response to Superman is going to be interesting too in that regard.
Yeah.
But anyway, I don't know what to make of this. I think that it was presented as this is the perfect time for me to step back.
Yeah, he wants to go back and he's running a very successful video game company.
I have to say this. And look, I was just saying how much back in the day we loved Perfect Dark. So I think I've proved my video game bona fides here. I'm just going to read his quote, because there's a part in here that does sound absolutely made up to me. With work completed on season 2, and before any meaningful work starts on season 3, get ready to see that season in 2028, now is the right time for me to transition my complete focus to Naughty Dog and its future projects, including writing and directing our exciting next game, Intergalactic: The Heretic Prophet. Isn't that the movie they were making in the HBO show The Franchise? Like, that shit sounds so lame. No offense. It's probably beautiful and cool and soul-stirring, and will make an incredible movie or television series someday. But dorks.
I was watching something.
Why are you calling it that?
Yeah.
Come on.
Well, you could just call it the Heretic Prophet.
Yes.
Yeah, but I don't know. Is there a previous Intergalactic? Is this the first in a like a long running?
Is it in the Beastie Boys expanded universe?
Probably. That's what he's got.
Now,
he's like,
Now I'm into it. Anyway,
in some ways, I still live in the Beastie Boys
we're clinging to it
universe.
We're trying to. I definitely saw some dudes trying to reenact Sabotage on the bridge on the way into work today. There is a way to take this news, though, that is not based on any fact, but it is a fair inference that someone had to take the fall for season 2. Now, I'm not saying that's what happened. I do not know that's what happened. But I think it is a reasonable...
I don't think that's true.
I don't know how you remove the co-creator of the show and banish him back to his incredibly lucrative and successful video game business. I don't think that's necessarily what happened. I feel confident saying that after I think it's fair to say like shortcomings of season 2. I'm not even coming into this saying like this sucks.
Yeah.
But in terms of like what the show accomplished, what it did with its time on our screens after a long absence and where it has to go next, there were probably some very serious creative conversations. And I don't mean like Casey Bloys being like, get these guys in a room until they fix it.
Make funnier? Yeah.
Well, that would have been my note. But more intergalactic heretics, please.
You guys tried playing Perfect Dark.
This was so cool. No, just that Craig Mazin and probably Neil Druckmann were like, what can we do to get in front of some things? Particularly like how we use the real estate that we have if we are on this path. And also I think, I do know just from the being adjacent to the fandom of the game that like season 3 is a pretty radical. It's like it's the Deaver season.
Yeah,
most likely.
It's going to be from Abby's perspective. I think it's going to recap some of the events of the second season. Right. Look, also there's a time spent element. Obviously, these seasons seem to take 2 to 3 years to make.
Yep.
So that's not nothing if he also has a thriving business that he wants to keep his eye on. So I think that there's probably
by the way, is that why for video viewers we're doing this in the rewatchable studio? You just couldn't step away from your...
I'm just going to rotate you out and Bill's going to rotate right in.
You just need to keep an eye on your successful business. Look, obviously it is flattering to my opinion about the show to think, finally, the master builder can do what he wants with this franchise. That is definitely not what happened behind the scenes, but it will be interesting to see how the show proceeds and also how it's received with Mazin as the sole face of the decision-making of the franchise. That's it.
What else do we have for news? Well, there's a big headline. Here's a big, big, big headline. Avid listeners of The Watch know that I've spent some time on the wall,
Like Jon Snow?
Some could say
or like...
watching from the wall, a watcher on the wall, waiting patiently for a character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe to appear.
You've been very patient.
I have been hoodwinked. I've been bamboozled.
Misled.
I've been led astray. And then finally, out of nowhere, this character made an appearance at the end of Ironheart. So if you have not watched Ironheart, which just recently concluded its first season.
It also recently debuted its first season.
It's a 6-episode first season. Executive produced by Ryan Coogler. I'll let Andy get into like sort of the details of the character.
Sure.
I'm going to be completely honest with you and say that I had not watched Ironheart. I watched the last episode of Ironheart.
That's it?
Yes.
Okay.
I watched because I knew what I was getting. I had read spoilers about what was going to happen in this episode. And he arrived.
He came.
He
is risen. Or fallen.
He is fallen.
He's fallen.
Spoiler, blah, blah, blah. Mephisto. And I now pronounce his name correctly because I heard it from the horse's mouth.
Oh, so you just wanted to do your own research on it. Also, what's really funny is I was talking yesterday. I was like trying to explain the situation, which goes over great. When I'm like, here's a sentence you want to hear from me right now. Marvel TV is at it again. But I was explaining how fucking Chris couldn't even say his name right. And everyone I was saying this to was like, he comes off as the cool one in this conversation.
Because I'm not, like, I don't...
Actually, it's Mephisto. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some intergalactic space heresy to study.
He has many names. He goes by many names.
He does.
One I thought it sounded suspiciously like the goalkeeper for PSG, Donnarumma, but I know it wasn't that. In any case, Mephisto, the Satan character of the MCU, is played by Sacha Baron Cohen.
It's incredible.
If you had given me 300 guesses in 2021,
okay,
I don't know that I would have come up with Sacha Baron Cohen.
Is that because, as a super fan of the anthropomorphized devil in the Marvel universe, you were expecting a incredibly tall, long-haired, red person with Drake's fake abs on him.
We don't know what Drake's workout routine is. Is the idea that Drake that's CGI or AI abs or something, or that he did not actually get himself into shape like that, or that he got plastic surgery?
Yeah, I think the assumption is that he made a little international trip and got something. He could probably afford to get it done with Canadian healthcare.
I didn't know you could do that.
You didn't know that?
You can get your abs done?
You can get fake anything, man.
Okay.
Look at my whole shit. This whole attitude is fake.
How do you
I don't believe
feel?
anything.
Yeah, right.
I just bought these ideas.
You actually just have Hakeem Jeffries on in the background.
Have you ever heard of the marketplace of ideas?
Yeah.
That's where I just direct deposit.
Here's a funny thing that happened on the way to finding out who played Mephisto.
This podcast is my favorite.
I fucking like this Ironheart episode.
Yeah, okay. All right. We maybe came in at the end.
Yeah.
But I actually have a lot of thoughts.
I'm not making any critical appraisal of this show.
I did a
stupid thing where I watched the last episode of a show that I have not heard a peep about.
Let's take another step back here, because there was a time when any entry into the Marvel Cinematic Television universe was greeted with, at the very minimum, attention.
Yes.
Especially by content-starved podcasts like ours or other podcasts. Like, it felt, whether it was significant, if we still believe that these were all important stories for the larger movie franchises, or there was just a passing interest. Like, are they going to be creative with this one? Is there another WandaVision in the offing, or a Loki?
Mm-hmm.
It's not fair to Ironheart that it arrived as it did, as basically the last gasp, like light from a dying star of a completely different era of Marvel's engagement in TV.
Yes.
This show was announced and greenlit in 2020. This show went into production
in 2022.
In 2022. It has been on the shelf. I guess they did some reshoots potentially last year, but it's been on the shelf for almost 3 years. It was then unceremoniously dumped in 2 3-episode blocks, and everybody moved away from it. And very, very little coverage, very, very little press. And to add to the unfairness, because this is a Marvel show with a person of color at the lead, it was review bombed almost to dust before it even came out. None of this is fair to anyone who spends all this time making a creative enterprise. But what's crazy about this is I don't think it's fair to this show, which is pretty good.
Did you look? I mean, again, we can't extrapolate too much from watching the last episode,
the first
and
one.
I really wasn't. Look at the big brain on Brad.
Hell yeah! Well, once I heard the devil was in it,
yeah,
I was like, okay,
yeah,
let's go.
Okay, so you bookended. You watched the first and the last,
and I jumped around a little bit.
Okay,
so I'm not here. Clearly, I have not done the work to be like, this is an exceptional television show, or talk in the weeds about what it did right or didn't do right.
Right,
but I'll say that it has a more style, more creativity, and more specificity than 80% of Marvel's television shows. It is definitely on a tier with Ms. Marvel, a show we didn't really deal with that much, that seems to have a keen understanding of the character and also a sense of place. And I think this is kind of crucial. It's pitched for a slightly younger viewer, which I like.
Right.
I'm not saying it's a kid's show, but in the same way that Ms. Marvel has a younger protagonist, like, I think that this is a show that
I found it
kids and teens could be
fairly
into.
adult, in terms of its themes,
in terms of the devil at
and
the
in
end.
terms of the consequences. I was quite surprised to see the end of this series.
It gets dark.
Yeah.
So I think there are a couple other. So again, the full picture of this is the character of Ironheart. Crerie Williams, a tech genius from Chicago, was introduced. This is in terms of the Marvel.
There's nothing fucking cooler than when you go off book.
Yeah.
And you're just like, I am now recapping Ironheart.
I'm going to tell you who created the character.
But don't ever break eye contact with me. If you look at the computer, I'll know you're yes.
Is this
go off? Do it.
Do it. Okay. In terms of Marvel comic characters, she is one of the more recent to make it to the screen. This character was created in 2016.
Oh, okay.
By Brian Michael Bendis and Mike Deodato. And it was created at a time, I think Tony Stark was no longer alive in the comics. And she directly received his legacy, or like his AI, or like some whatever. So it was really like an Iron Man replacement in the Marvel universe.
She gets Jarvis? But
I don't
in
know
the
my
show,
computer
it's
open.
Natalie. She changes the.
Well, so there's
her AI thing is Natalie.
There's a more direct
and she has like the
connection.
mesh, right?
See now I'm not. Now you're just throwing stuff at me. This is like dodgeball. I can't keep up.
I had to clear my glasses because I want to see this. So
the spittle of my like intensity here. In the MCU, Dominique Thorne was cast in this. Basically, she auditioned for Shuri in the first Black Panther movie.
Yes,
and then they were like, "We like you. We're basically putting a hold on you. We're getting your bird rights or whatever." And they put her in Black Panther 2.
And you might have seen her in Beale Street. You might have seen her
as
in
an actress,
Judas and the Black Messiah.
But this is a character that was introduced.
Dominique Thorne,
in Wakanda Forever, and didn't make a ton of sense in that movie, and kind of doesn't really make sense in terms of like it does feel like something that was just sort of sandwiched into something else. Again, part of the old Marvel strategy of like we're going to flood the zone with stuff, and we're just going to keep making it with the assumption that every time we throw a noodle at the wall, it's going to stick. That hasn't been the case. What's strange to me about the series is maybe the boldest thing about it, which is. The framing is really good. Chinaka Hodges, who adapted and sort of and created the show for television, I think for these types of series does a really good job just getting us going. The first 10 minutes of the first episode brings us through what happened in Wakanda. She gets kicked out of MIT and then has to go back to Chicago and crash lands in the street in Chicago. And you feel, shout out to Chris Storer, but like you do feel like, oh, you're Chicago again.
Yeah.
And here's some people, characters in a world and a vibrancy of like the south side of Chicago of people being like, why are you wearing this half metal suit? And that's charming.
There's no Chicago roots, like, because there's some crossover with some Iron Man stuff.
Yeah.
But Iron Man is not a Chicago character historically, right?
Historically, he is not a Chicago character.
He's not an industrialist from the great Midwest, is what I mean.
He is not. Did you think that like he came up in the improv scene?
Well, can I just say so? Yeah. So we're just talking freely about Ironheart now.
Yeah.
If Obadiah Stane,
right,
which is played by Jeff Bridges in the first Iron Man, his kid is in this show, played by Alden Ehrenreich, which I had no idea whatsoever that he was in this show, and he's pretty good. You know, like he's pretty good, but I just didn't know if there was like
that connective tissue.
Yeah, had the Stains gone to the Midwest because they were just their name was Mud in California.
So the stain spread. The sidebar here, Alden Ehrenreich seems like a good actor. Like he was amazing in the Coen Brothers movie Hail Caesar. Yes. He did his best in Solo. That was a cursed ship from the beginning. But I have to say, with all love and respect, that like showing up as the fourth lead of an abandoned Marvel property from 3 years ago does feel like a glow down of historic proportions.
Yes, I hear you.
That said, nowhere to go but up in terms of like, oh, I'm just a working character actor now, and that's probably a better lane for him to begin with. I think that one of the problems of the show probably would have been more clear if I'd watched all of them was just like, this clearly became a clearinghouse of ideas of many, many cooks in the old Marvel TV method. Because remember, this year we were talking about Daredevil Born Again, and that's the first show they've ever done for television where they've admitted someone is a showrunner here. It's not just the collective of like producers who are in the writer's room, and also Kevin Feige. I
wouldn't use Daredevil Born Again as an example of like coherence of vision, but sure,
but it was pretty good.
What you're saying.
And
did you watch it?
Yeah, we watched it. We talked about it.
I watched like an episode or two. Yeah.
What?
Yeah, we didn't talk about Daredevil as like a project, right?
We didn't. Run the tape. I have different memories of the early part of the year.
We did literally like, I was like, it's cool when that guy gets hit with a million knives and then it changes.
That was the first episode.
And then the whole show changes and I'm out.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, then it became more of a character study and then I was more interested. So there you go. Can't wait for season 2. What I mean by that is Chinaka Hodges seemed locked into this character and into a world. And then someone, and apparently it was Kevin Feige, was like, what about magic? Which is kind of insane. Now, as someone
is that not in the comics?
I don't know. I've never read these comics. I'm not actively reading Marvel comics in 2016.
Then how do you have a fucking encyclopedia?
I was canvassing for Hillary, bro. I was busy. Okay,
that worked out.
Defending democracy.
Yeah.
No, actually, it's relevant in the sense that the character doesn't really have much of a.
Were you
history.
Who she was writing from her personal email account?
Yes. I was advising on all areas.
gmail.com. Andy Greenwald.
Makes sense.
Heard your take on season 4 of The Americans.
So you know what? She didn't hear it because I wasn't given opportunity to voice it on the podcast.
Yeah. Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt.
I was silenced. I'm glad. Thank you for giving me the chance to
I know
litigate
you're blaming
this.
me for that. If you want to do an Americans rewatch project with me, I'd be happy to do it.
You mean a watch project with you? You're like, this show's pretty cool. Anyway, the character does not have a deep bench of history and a rogues gallery, so it is kind of a malleable clay to go in any direction. And I'm not saying that, like, off the dome, I'm like, oh, well, here's a great rogues gallery for the world's greatest computer genius who's also broke and living in Chicago to come up against. I have no, that doesn't really write itself. And as someone who likes comic book insanity, the idea of like magic and tech working in the same world, like that's kind of what makes Marvel and comics in general fun. All of that said, the fact that she's up against a established canonical villain in The Hood, played by Anthony Ramos from Hamilton and In the Heights and Twisters, whose power is derived from some kind of supernatural stuff, as we're getting to, and then like the show actually being about her choosing to ally herself with the devil because she's been overlooked and disrespected and wants her deceased friend back to life.
Yes.
It was pretty wild.
Yeah, and that's how it ends, is like her getting becoming like possessed by the devil.
I think
there's a cutscene, but yeah.
I'm reading the quotes a lot today, but I think this is one of the all-time quotes of like when someone, maybe Joanna will write like the actual, like, we have the footage tapes of what went on during this era of IP storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the greatest quotes of all time. This is not, usually when we bring up Marvel peoples, we're like, well, that's why we made the parallax view. No, this is my new favorite quote. Entertainment Weekly asked Chinaka Hodge, who has spent 5 years of her adult life shepherding this 6-episode series to the screens, about the decision to end the show with Riri Williams selling her soul to the physical manifestation of the devil, was a long-standing choice she had made when she came on the project. That's a really great question, Hodge says. I wish I could answer it more plainly. It was not my decision alone. I was empowered by Marvel to make that decision. I don't know what will happen next, but as a fan, I'm really hoping to see him make a lot of appearances. Now, this has the same tenor as George Cheeks turning to the Paramount shareholders and being like, I was empowered by Sherry Redstone to pay a bribe to the President of the United States so David Ellison can buy our company. I didn't make this decision alone, but I'm excited to see what the president does next.
I'm going to start empowering you to do more things.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That is a wild quote that tells us everything.
Sure, and I also got the feeling like Mephisto... Sacha Baron Cohen does Sacha Baron Cohen. It's almost a perfect role for him because he gets to do 7 accents in one scene.
Yeah.
If I had to guess...
Please, yeah.
That feels like an expiring contract move.
That
feels like we had this. It didn't get into Agatha. It wasn't in WandaVision. It's not going to be in the Doom Chronicles.
It's like Dame on the Bucks.
They stretched him.
They stretched him, and they waived him.
Yeah.
I again, like, we don't spend too much time on like the deal making side of Hollywood, but I would love to know that entire wooing signing process, like what he was told, because this thing of he's just like thrilled to finally be joining the Marvel Cinematic Universe in hour 6 of a 2-night dump of a show we've forgotten about. Crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy. But maybe we're just bearing the lead here. He's really good, and it's kind of fun.
Yeah.
And it's campy, and it's not bad. It's lively in a very strange way. The only thing that's truly devilish is the pizza that he serves Anthony Ramos, which I was like, that's the tell. Well, that looks so bad.
I thought it was like kind of like John's New York style, like kind of overheated. No,
I mean that's
like melting. It's in Chicago.
That looks like DiGiorno. You know what I mean? If you're in Chicago, have him serve the devil's pizza, aka deep dish. You know what I mean? Like really, be like, this soupy casserole.
Come
is
on
delicious.
in, Ironheart. It's fork and knife time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That would have been fine.
Well, this was an unexpectedly in-depth discussion about a show that we only sort of watched, but I'm glad that some bets pay off in this country. You know?
Are you happy about this? I mean, this month, well, basically, this month alone, you get Mephisto and you get Mr. Fantastic. You're finally
I'm done.
Your long position on the MCU is finally bearing fruit.
It hit.
I'm thrilled for you.
There was one other piece of news from this week.
Okay.
That goes into the rest of our conversation, which is that The Bear was renewed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is something, no Windhorst, but Andy and I had heard that this was a possibility.
Members
or
of
that this was likely.
members of the extended Bear family were being very loose about future plans for this show in public settings.
Okay.
I'll leave it at that.
Not that you were present for.
I was not.
Secondhand, you heard about
But
this.
I got a lot of texts from people who were. What does Windhorse do? They were just
Why
like...
is that?
Yeah. So...
Why is that?
That seemed like it was in the cards.
Okay, so the Bear has been renewed. This is a good way to start talking about the Bear. Now, in our last two conversations, Andy and I sort of went episode by episode, but what I thought we could do, if you would like, is to kind of start at the end, since the news and the last episode of the Bear this season are conjoined.
Right. Very much so.
Despite whatever misgivings I think, or ups and downs we've had with this season, I found myself pretty charged up by the end in terms of what could happen next, and excited that there is going to be a fifth season. I guess what's the best way to talk about this?
Well, I think we should start at the end.
Okay.
I do. I mean,
so at the end of the 10th episode of the fourth season of The Bear.
Well, the entire episode is just in one. This is a bottle episode, guys. It doesn't change locations.
Yeah, and it's essentially a one-act play with three characters.
A fourth at the end.
And a fourth at the end, who come to the realization that Carmy has adjusted the partnership agreement for the Bear restaurant, that Uncle Jimmy gets 50%, which has always been because he put the money in, and that the rest of the 50% was the Bear. And it was always under the assumption that the Bear was going to be Carmy, Natalie, and to some extent Sid.
Yeah.
It turns out that he has gone to Natalie's husband, Pete, who is very, very, very clear that he honors attorney-client privilege.
Yeah.
So he did not tell his wife about this.
Nope.
Pete adjusted the partnership agreement, and Carmy has been diluted out, to
zero.
Yes. He is no longer a partner in the Bear. And Sid, when she finds out about this at the end of 9 and into 10, when she begins talking about Carmy, immediately sees it for what it is, which is you're quitting. Now, I think we get to a place where Carmy's gesture can be read as more benevolent than that. But he does not run away from the fact that he is trying to get out of being a chef at a restaurant. And he says that he thinks he's done with restaurants.
Yeah.
I thought that the last two episodes of this season were generally extraordinary. Part of it is because I think it pays off some lingering debts that the show had.
Yeah. Yes.
Thematically, narratively, emotionally. And it puts the show in a place that I think is pretty exciting for a show in its fifth season.
Yes.
And the thing I kept thinking about, because these are two shows that we've been talking about a lot over the last 5 years of this podcast, is this is the inflection point where Jesse Armstrong said, "I'm done telling the story of Succession." And the people behind the Bear have decided they still have more story to tell. And but they are at similar moments where the major character of the show, in the case of Succession, we know who that is. And in the case of the Bear, Carmy, are at least stepping back, if not exiting. So give me some thoughts about the end and where it goes.
I'll start at the very end. I loved the finale. I thought it was, I'll use your word, I thought it was extraordinary. I thought it was the Bear at its best, in that Chris Storer has empowered these actors to be their fullest, most present, most emotionally intense selves. And he has given us characters that are worthy of the performers and put them all into the position to say every single thing that had not been said for the previous 3.9 seasons. That glorious release it's hard to discuss without the larger context of Jesus fucking Christ. That took way too long for characters to say things to each other that were unspoken. The episode itself and the confrontation itself was spectacular. It was so violently overdue that it actually took me longer than I expected in the face of such a strong episode to relax into it. I'm just going to assume now that this is gospel because of how we saw these seasons play out. This episode, these conversations, this screaming match turning into hugging, which is what Bear is, absolutely is where the show was always intending to go and to end.
Yeah.
The story that the series embarked on was always pointing to this moment, and there aren't a lot of shows that do that, and if I may, stick that landing. This should have happened a year ago. I think there's just no possible way to say otherwise, because if you just look at the totality of these 2 seasons, I mean, there's a couple different ways to talk about it. I can't think of a single great television show that has ever done less with more in terms of how much 20 episodes of television to tell what was a relatively modest story.
Mm-hmm.
There were digressions that were worth it, like I think the Sid episode in 404.
Mm-hmm.
And there were episodes that weren't worth it, like 408, which takes all of the goodwill and momentum built up in Bears at the wedding and just slams it into a brick wall.
Yeah.
With a dream sequence, among other things. It's just like, what are we doing here? I think that was wild. But the emotions expressed in this episode and like what these people said to each other and what they were to each other was worth it. I mean, I wrote down like it's actually pretty wild how good Carmy is at talking once he starts, having never ever.
Well,
done it
I think
before.
that he gets emotionally and maybe verbally unblocked after his lunch with his mother.
Yeah, I think that there is
I think he sees that if Dee Dee can make a step towards making amends and like repair, then like why can't I?
I think that there is I'll say this and then I'll leave it alone because I want to talk about the merits and the substance of this episode. But like, there's just such a clear case to be made, I think, that journey would have been so much sharper and clearer if it had been told with more economy. This might be the most me example I could ever give you, but you know that there's a Fleetwood Mac reunion album from 2002 called Say You Will that is generally not beloved. The reason it's generally not beloved is because it is, I think, 18 tracks and has things like Stevie Nicks' witchy thoughts about 9/11 in one song and Lindsey Buckingham's song Murrow turning over in his
Just
grave.
Out of curiosity, does she have any outside of the mainstream
there's a beautiful lyric about Alice in Wonderland and how jet fuel doesn't melt steel beams. But my reason for bringing this up is that I believe, and I have done this, and I'll put it next to our barbecue playlist, that there is a masterpiece in that album if you take 6 songs out.
Yeah.
Everything is brought into focus. It's a phenomenal record. You could do that, and maybe someone will do that with these 2 seasons of The Bear, and it's all there. Everything that I love about the show is there on the page, but the experience of like dipping and weaving was frustrating at times.
Yeah.
But where it ended up is really kind of profound and exciting. And as I was watching it, I was thinking, this show really, really is the Difficult Man series for the therapy age. Because we've had we had a whole generation of shows, right? Where, like, use Mad Men as the example, where we see Don Draper's excesses and we see his flaws, but we also see him be so brilliant that we understand why everyone around him goes along with it.
Mm-hmm.
I would argue that we've never actually see Carmy be brilliant. We see him be a dickhead. We see him.
I think Carmy, I mean, I think some of it is tell versus show. So yes, Sydney emphasizing that Carmy's food is the best that she tasted in New York, that he is one of the world's best, that he's better than Luca, and that he's Chef Terry's sort of star protege, that he's worked for Boulud and Keller and
but what we see is really the cost of it on himself, on the wreckage of the family that he returns to, on the way he treats people, and honestly, as he verbalizes really well in this episode, how he responds to opportunity and success and self-sabotage. So it's kind of, I kept thinking about Mad Men in the sense that I'm sorry, I'm going to spoil the end of Mad Men, so hit the 10-second advance if you haven't really engaged with one of the greatest shows of all time yet. But it ends with him stripped down to basically nothing, the bone, at a hippie retreat on the edge of America, finally potentially at peace and in the lotus position. And in that moment of release, he dreams up the most successful commercial of all time.
Yeah, I mean, in this version, it would be like if Carmy was like walked out of that back lot of the Bear and then like opened a restaurant down the street called Mikey's. Like
literally that.
Yeah.
The fact that the show is all about the reckoning of the self as separate from achievement makes it extremely, I think, relevant, relatable, interesting, and a real divergence from the previous generation shows. I I was really affected by that. And I thought that project came into view in a really intense way in this finale. And it was, I think, bringing it all the way full circle to your initial question, incredibly freeing, not just for Carmy, but for the future of a show that has been held hostage, not just by the please keep it stretched out whims of a network, but also by the difficult man tantrum, essentially, and repression of its lead.
Yeah, I'm trying to be better about being like, it should have been this, like, and be just like, okay, what did we get? We never really got a 3 and 4 were a compromise made with FX that wanted more episodes, and we were working around Fantastic Four and Deliver Me from...
Yeah, we don't know that.
We don't know that.
It honestly could be that Chris was like, I want a little more space here. I want a little more room to experiment.
And I want to like kind of mess with the form. And, I think the first episode of the 3rd season, which is a very divisive episode that I've rewatched it in the intervening days since the last podcast. And I was like, it's still an extraordinary piece of filmmaking that actually has way more narrative in it that I remember.
Yeah.
So you get these moments of him seeing Claire outside of his mom's house the night of Fishes, or him, I believe it's 301 that you see that he goes to the funeral and can't bring himself to actually participate.
And that's obviously a huge
revelation. Part of the last 2 episodes of the season. So I'm trying not to like what we could have had versus what we had. I think that for me, the 9 and 10 stretch, and Joanna Cal and Christora wrote the 9th one, Christora wrote and directed the last one. Yeah, you've been waiting the entire time for Carmy and Richie to have this conversation. It seems absurd maybe that Sid has not opened her email and Carmy has not found another moment to talk to Sid in the intervening moments between whenever her dad has the heart attack. I think it's in 405 or 6.
The picking nits about timing is a self-inflicted wound. I mean, there are...
But in any case, none of that can happen until Carmen and Dee Dee talk. Like, ultimately, like, he needs to be told that he has some value by the only person he's ever wanted to please, aside from Mikey. And then he can go forward and like be there in a present moment with other people. Like, that shit did make sense to me. And I have to say, for as up and down as I've been on Jamie Lee Curtis for this entire run of the show, every moment was worth it for that scene.
Yeah. I agree. I think that there's something that I wish other people would study, and it's probably specific to the caliber of performer or the type of performer that gets hired for the show, but the intimacy of the scene work again and again, but particularly that scene with the 2 of them, and then everyone involved in the finale. It's really rare. It's theatrical. It makes you feel like you are in the room with them, and
I mean, everything it's such intense close up,
but it's so present. Like I'm so riveted. I mean, I think Eben Moss-Bachrach is an incredible actor. It's an all-time TV character performance, regardless of the episodes or the season that he's in. When the blow lands on him, when Carmy says, "I was at the funeral," and he turns and he comes in like a heat-seeking missile,
like between us right now. Yeah.
I can't take my eyes off it.
Yeah.
It is absolutely...
That's Harvey Keitel shit. That's like the stuff.
It's electric.
Yeah.
It's electric. He is living the emotional truth of the character in that moment, and Christora just hit record, It's wild, but you can't do that. I mean, he'd say that. Any actor would say that. Like, you can't do that without your scene partner, or without trusting your crew, or without trusting your director. And that is such a gift. And I totally agree that it came down to that kind of intimacy, and, that the only person he wants to impress, and he doesn't let her into the restaurant. He cooks from her own kitchen. Yes, and that frees him from the burden of restaurant cooking.
But even the conversation that they have where Dee Dee is clearly like following the program and trying to make amends with Carmen in a very structured way.
Yeah.
I felt like just even around that conversation, and like the way Jeremy Allen White projects discomfort in the very same moment of being like, I can't believe everything I've ever wanted is about to happen, which is my mom's going to apologize to me and say that she loves me and that I'm special to her. It's like, to be able to do both of those things like pretty much at the same time is extraordinary. And it really reminded me of that very significant moment that I referenced earlier on Succession, where Andy and I had a conversation about how the detail of the writing and performance in that episode was such that you were like, somebody in this writer's room or multiple people in this writer's room have experienced the sudden loss of a parent.
Yeah.
The writing on 9 and then writing between Carm and Dee Dee is like, this is like what you talk about with parents as they get older. And you get uncomfortable when you're like, I don't want to be in this moment with you right now. But then it breaks through to something else.
I think even separate from the parent relationship, because I said the previous podcast that, I think the bear works best as a fantasy. And again, I do not mean that in a pejorative way.
I know.
It is a
the
fantasy
table and the cans of money and
or that your troubled mother, when you finally are basically forced to sit in the room with her, has 30 pages of handwritten notes that she will just vulnerably share with you about how she feels about things and open herself up and be vulnerable so you can be vulnerable too. But separate and apart from the specifics of that relationship, that one thing that I think a lot of drama writing, let alone best comedy writing, I think a lot of the writing fails to capture is that when someone that you are in conflict with says the thing you most want them to say, the real challenge is letting it in.
Mm-hmm.
And that's Richie's entire thing. And I mean, that's why the yelling between Sydney and Carmen, where they don't speak to each other, feels cathartic and messy, but not unpleasant or not untrue, because the real work always is on yourself, right? You have to let the words in, because the armor that you've built for yourself can start to feel comfortable and familiar and righteous. And to break down not just the Sydney Carmen one, but the Carmen Richie one, and then have Sugar come in and just melt it all like freshly fallen snow, is like that's very, very complicated and elegant writing, even though it's messy and yelling. It's the thing about this that I find confounding, because look what they are capable of doing. Look what Chris Storer is capable of doing with these actors in 28 minutes.
The way that the show is shot, for the most part, there was a lot of very, very tight close-ups. I don't know what like lens choice he made, but often the faces fill the screen. They're enormous. The Dee Dee Carm scene, Sugar getting the news about the Food and Wine review. There's just like a lot of very intimate, at times claustrophobic close-ups. And I wondered whether or not you read the choice visually to shoot that last episode almost like a play and let these guys exist in a kind of physical space and move around and interact and hand each other cigarettes and pull them away and all that stuff.
Sydney smoking a cigarette like I did the one time I was depressed and tried.
Well, it was ironically a breath of fresh air to me to see this kind of like physical movement in a show that I think had tightened it up a little bit, maybe more than I expected it to over the course of the last season or two.
Yeah, I think that was a validation of the bet that the creative team made, was that this was always the show. This was always the journey. This was always what interested them, was the emotional journey of a blocked guy returning to his hometown and struggling with his genius and struggling with the opportunity to be better. And I think I would imagine that everyone involved in the show would feel extremely validated and extremely proud that for a show that got so much attention for the T-shirts characters were wearing, or the real life culinary heroes who were making appearances, or any of the stuff that came from the kitchen setting. Oh, it's so tense in there. I had no idea, whatever the coverage was, that they could earn this. And I would imagine even the biggest skeptic who made it to this episode was like, that's my show.
Yeah.
That's the bear. And that's what it always was. I think it's amazing. And I'm happy where we got. And also, it is a thing where so I learned, I didn't finish the season until the news broke, right? That the show had been renewed.
Yes.
I definitely was approaching it with some skepticism.
I wasn't doing a great job being like, you'll see when you get to the end. Yeah.
No,
also, the last episode's called Goodbye.
But would I have been satisfied if this is a finale? Yes, because I do think that, as has been apocryphally told and retold, this was the final beat of the 3-season structure, and maybe even the original shorter length feature that the bear began as in Chris Store's mind or in his laptop. Like, this was where it was ending.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there is enough power in that's actually the show to leave it there. But, and I'm really curious if we could get some clarity, or maybe we'll get to have some creative conversations with the people involved when they opened themselves up to the idea of doing more. So a couple things about that. We said in passing before we reached the end that, like, is Carmy the Block on the show? Is the show better or more interesting without him?
I had a thing I wanted to ask you about, because it's pretty rare. This happened more. Typically happens more in music.
Okay.
But it's pretty rare to be experiencing a TV show where it's about what it's about, which is, making a restaurant work in 2020s, and this guy who's traumatized by loss and emotional abuse, trying to heal himself.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also about the TV show The Bear.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's a moment in 8 where, so actually a scene I really loved between Koppelman as the computer and Sugar. And they have this conversation about the numbers, and Nat's just like, okay, so what are you telling me? What are you telling me? And he's like, well, what do you want this to be? And she's like, we can make our VIG.
We can do it.
We can basically stay afloat, and then everything we do here is like, that's a little bit of profit. And I think he says that's a pocket umbrella that the rain just goes around when you use it. And she's like, but we can keep going. And he was like, yes, but the question is, why would you want to?
Yep.
Which I don't think is necessarily, I don't apply it to The Bear as a show. I apply it to doing anything. Like, is it enough for it just to be enough? And then you have to basically decide, are you in it for the people you're doing it with, or are you in it for the other stuff?
That's the story of this podcast, right?
No. I mean, that's why.
That's why it's the big rewatchable sign. Well, the name of our, in defense, the name of our podcast is there.
Yeah.
Oh, why didn't we just use electrical tape when we're in here?
I don't want to damage Bill's sign.
Oh, that's right. He would probably know who did it. Speaking of Mad Men, this is a...
Do you see what I'm saying, though?
Yes,
like the idea of, like, The Bear also being about making a TV show.
So the reason I want to go back to Mad Men is because Mad Men was also quite meta, and you could do a one-to-one on some actual things behind the scenes of what was happening on screen. And famously, the agreed upon consensus best episode of the series is the suitcase. That's what the money's for scene is Matt Weiner, the creator, but in his telling of it, or his understanding of it, or at least other people's psychological read of it, he's Peggy, and Don is David Chase.
Yes.
And
that'd be funny if in Matt Weiner's telling it was like a really nice thing to say, like, well, that is what the money is for.
And he's just like, while they're at the dealership buying something.
I wonder if there was like another John Hamm reading of that, like a different take. That's what the money is for?
If they did an Apatow just for us take of every scene of Mad Men. I think it would tell us a lot. And if season 5 of The Bear was announced with Ayo Edebiri as the star and Joanna Kahlo as the showrunner, this is just psychological fan casting now. I'm not saying that's what's happening. I do think that the renewal announcement was interesting because it didn't confirm or deny anyone's involvement in it. I imagine that has to do with the fact that they wanted to put the word up, but also that all the deals weren't closed and that maybe there are going to be some surprises. Now, that said, the most impressive thing in many ways about the Bears' run up to this point is the large sense of community and community theater that Chris Storer has created, where it seems like anyone will not only show up whenever, they'd be thrilled to do so, to be a part of it. And so it actually feels absolutely natural. Again, this is not based on any knowledge, but if season 5 is announced and Jeremy Allen White is a special guest star, or he's only in the first and last episode, or he's haunting it the way Claire Bear haunted season 3, and he can shoot all that in a week before going to do, Springsteen 2, like that, the Tunnel of Love years, which I am actively pitching. That is still the show. That is not after MASH. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, that actually still is the show and in keeping with the spirit of it. And it's not unintentional that the one line that kind of didn't clunk, but it was just like, oh, okay, in the finale is when he says, Sydney, you are the bear.
I didn't think that clunked at all. I know that some people are like, I didn't like that, but I don't. it's actually interesting. Carm's nickname is Bear.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the Bear. He's not like you're me or anything. Like, she's the restaurant.
Yeah, no, I get it.
It turns out that she embodies the spirit of this restaurant that I don't know that the Carmy character ever could get his head or hands around.
That's completely true. So that's why I don't note it. Like, I let that one. I'm the executive. They shoot it, but it is also a little bit of like, that's the trade. Like, next season, the season 4 recap,
it'll have the voiceover. Yeah,
that line is in there.
Yeah.
But the idea of Richie being a full partner in something for the first time in his life, Sydney, who has just, an episode or two ago is shooting free throws to determine whether the universe thinks she's a trash person or not.
Mm-hmm.
Can they do more than just tread water? Will they be supported like Momofuku restaurants, but also selling sauces and noodles, and in this case, Italian sandwiches? Like, what kind of a company will it be, and where will the finances come from to balance the larger thing?
Because it's like it sounds like the takeaway kitchen, the to-go kitchen is going to be like a going concern.
And honestly, just the thought of these people, these creative people, not just the writers and directors and the actors, but like everyone involved in it, being like, what else could we do here? What else can we make this show about? Could there be not a villain, but like a heavy introduced to the show,
right?
An antagonist? Could there be something with customers? Could there be something, could it be about something other than the Brizato family psychodrama? I find exciting, because I think, unlike with a lot of other shows that had the opportunity to continue, this episode really, really resolved a lot of shit in a way that felt earned and touching. And I think that the show has made a lot of brave creative choices over its time. And I think, whether it's because Jeremy Allen White wants to do movies, or this is just what we're imagining is the case. And from the beginning, it's been like, he's ready to go. If I had to guess,
I think it's like not an easy character to play. And it's like, it's not like he gets, he has to be in a very emotionally damaged mindset, or pretend to be, for the entirety of this series. He only really gets some light in his life in these last few episodes. Although, that being said, like, you can go back to season 2 and there's more kind of, not humor, but I would say that he's a more functional, like,
person, human,
a little bit. Yeah, I think it's the breakup with Claire and some other things that happen in 2.
The extra season here did him no favors, because his arc was the show's arc, and he just had to carry the burden of a lack of movement for a very, very long time. And what I was saying before about like that movement stuff, that timing stuff, generally in filmed entertainment, we are not sitting there with a stopwatch or like putting it together, like Carrie Matheson's crazy board being like, when did this happen in the timeline? But because the show made itself so much about stretching, and then also about how every second counts, it's asking for it, so that every scene in the back half of the season between Jess and Richie, where it's just like, oh, today they're going to have another move the ball forward, profound conversation based on a question that anyone who started working at a place would have asked 3 months ago, felt weird.
Mm-hmm.
Did I love those scenes? Yes. Sarah Ramos is awesome. Like, that's another storyline of them, their flirtation, whatever it is. Like, let's go. I'm here for it in the most basic bitch TV fan way possible. I am shipping them.
Yeah.
Okay. Shipping them like Odysseus was shipping the whatever it was called. I didn't research it ahead of time. But that's me.
What does that mean? You didn't read it. You didn't read the Odyssey?
I've glanced at it, like I glanced at Ironheart. I feel like they're both cultural. They're content for me to consume. Windhorse fingers. My point is, I enjoyed those scenes, but it was tough for me to watch them for what they were, as opposed to like, did they just shoot these all on the same day and then just sprinkle them throughout the season?
Is, like, I think it's good for us too, and it's good for the viewers, because I don't think viewers are maybe as addicted to figuring this shit out as you and I are, but like, we need a break from like, did they shoot all of this in the weeks before he left to go do Bruce Springsteen?
But I want to be clear, it's not just that I'm trying to do the forensic analysis, the timeline. It's just it's also how it felt within the 3 months of this season, right? This season that's what the clock is set for at the beginning of the season, of how much rope they have.
Because they basically do an echo of the second season premiere, where Carm is really bad at math or keeping time, and keeps adding or subtracting money in months to the clock.
Do you feel, as someone who still goes home to his childhood home in Philadelphia, do you feel that Claire's sweatshirt being in his closet strained credulity? Like,
No.
did you bought that?
Yes.
Have you found equally specific things?
I got rid of a bunch of stuff, but I still have some very important baseball memorabilia from 40 years of service to the game.
Very important baseball memorabilia? Can we get a little?
I still have trophies. Still have my jacket from travel baseball. Doesn't fit.
Not recently, because my parents moved 15 years ago, but like when they were moving out of my childhood home, like I did find things like a baseball that my grandfather had given me that was signed by Mike Schmidt. And I was like, I brought it to my parents. And I was like, this is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Like, I can't say that Pop was the friendliest fella, but he did get this for me. And my mom was like, that's his handwriting. You know that, right? I was like, wow. Any other dreams? You want a machine gun right now?
Alden Ehrenreich plays Obadiah Stane, by the way, or his son Zeke. Not to blow your mind there.
I thought you were fan casting Alden Ehrenreich as a young Henry Greenwald.
What would you do if Bear season 5, episode 1 is Carmi and Claire in Barcelona wandering around looking at architecture and eating?
Hell yeah.
Like, what if it is still a Carmi show?
Well, I'm not saying it shouldn't be, but I'm saying him saying, and also we're making it seem cut and dry. One of the other things
the new El Bulli restaurant called?
Well,
did they close El Bulli, right?
Yeah, well, Ferdinand closed it, but Albert, his brother, has like tickets or something.
Tickets. Yeah, that's where they got the popcorn machine when you walk in. Well, that's what it was on Bourdain.
That's what you heard about. It's like
I've never been to Spain.
That's secretly what you were doing last week. You were just location scouting for Bear S5. I think we should give the show also some credit for the way the argument broke down, where two things could be true at once. That he was doing something kind, that also doing something selfish, that tracked with how he had behaved previously. I think it went right at that. The show isn't necessarily better without him and that character in it. It would not make any sense if he was just written off, like when Valerie became the Hogan family.
Yes.
You know what I mean? It's not that, but give him different light, different energy, different frequency of usage, and I think it becomes a different, more naturally evolving thing. That said, I've been watching some really, really good travel reels in Lisbon recently, and I feel like maybe that's where he and Claire should go.
It's interesting.
Just for like the seafood and beer, like very low key, or like the Bifana stand, you know, where you just get your little pork sandwich.
Yeah.
Have you?
Yeah.
Must be nice.
I preferred Porto, personally.
Did you?
Yeah. I'm a little bit more of a northern industrial guy, rather than... If
I had access to your Google history, like how many times have you searched what is the Manchester of blank for like every place you go?
Pretty much.
So you can walk the streets
Porto was a little bit more temperate when I was there, and it's got the wine country right outside of the city,
like Portland does. Another favorite of yours.
And I found like the architecture of Porto to be gorgeous. Lisbon's it's easy to look at. You know what I mean?
But real heads know, huh?
Real heads do know.
I mean, I'm just looking at my phone, just trying to pay these bills,
Do you want to talk a little bit about our playlist before we get out of here?
Oh, yeah. How are you feeling about it this year? Well, let me introduce this concept just to say that like a couple years ago, we decided we would, because we don't really talk about music on the pod anymore, but every once in a while, or professionally, really, like we used to. But we did want to bless the people with something. And I remember in the first year when I was like, we're making songs that we like, not necessarily new songs, but songs that we are really digging, that we think would be really good.
You're the executive producer of this project.
For sure. But I appreciate that. But in the beginning, it really was like, this is for your barbecue playlist.
Yes.
And I believe the first edition of this, I had like a DJ Khaled song on it. In recent years, personal tastes have really started to drive the narrative, where I'm like, Chris,
just get it off your chest.
I'm like, Chris, can you send me like 8 tracks that you're really feeling right now? What I don't say, what I leave unsaid is, could some of them not be 10-minute shoegaze drones? And you're like,
gouge away. Yeah, right.
And you're like, at your age, you like what you like. So now it's really more of a back and forth.
I've curated my picks for this year. These could feasibly play during a barbecue.
What else is happening during this barbecue is just everyone talking about the big, beautiful bill and what it's going to do to all of our lives and the future of this country. Like, is that the kind of intended? I actually really, jokes aside, I do love doing this because you introduced me to really good songs that I like.
You introduced me to really good stuff too.
And I feel very good about this one.
I thought we were sticking to more current stuff, but the first track you picked is a Joe Walsh song from But Seriously, Folks.
But then the rest of it is new. But that I have been listening to that.
His 1978 solo record.
Because Theme from Boat Weirdos rules.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is setting the mood.
Yeah, it's a good like opening gambit. Yeah.
I feel like the last few years I put one old song at the end for the heads.
Yeah.
But this year you dropped the live version of Nobody by Knife Play. And I was like, well, we know the set closer Ugly Light song for this year.
That's a good song.
It fucking rules.
Yeah.
But
that's more like on the Crazy Horse meets Spiritualized meets Shoegaze.
I just want to say, I don't want to like make things all about me, but like 90% about me. I just feel like I really relate now to the line producer of The Bear trying to juggle everyone's schedules so that everyone can make Avengers Doomsday, but also make a season of television. That's what I'm like trying to make a West Side Gun remix get along with Dean Blunt.
Oh yeah, my boy from Ice Age.
You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, I think it would be fun to see if like the real heads can tell
who picked what,
who did what on this. Yeah, you did 8, I did 10 songs, just to assert my dominance a little bit more while you were vacationing in Portugal. But I think everything else on here,
industrial parts,
other than the first track, every other song on here I think is a new song from 2025.
Yeah, I tried to make it that way. Maybe there's a 24 in there or something like that. I think you're right. I think people should be able to listen to it and then check it out and guess who picked what.
I will say that I did a 180 on Yule because we saw Yule perform live on Mulaney, and I came back absolutely shook up, like William F. Buckley being like, "What's up with the kids?"
That was kind of your Barbie, where you were like, you saw 5 seconds of Yule and you were like, not at all.
And then I heard the other songs in the record. I'm like, it's pretty good.
Yeah. This is always a fun exercise. There's lots of really good stuff on here. John Glacier, Sorry, They Are Gutting a Body of Water.
We both love that song.
Hotline TNT's new album is awesome. It's on there.
New Preoccupations album is great.
Yeah.
Had you heard Ex Void before? Because that's my guy from the Tubs.
Yeah, I had.
What's that like? Oh, I was about to say, what's it like having two projects simultaneously that are both really good? And then I remembered that we're in the Rewatchable studio. And this is just how you wake up every morning.
This is my side project.
That's unbelievable.
This is my lo-fi
just
bedroom pop
just
thing.
For the heads?
Yeah.
Okay.
Happy July 4th to you.
I hope people have a great weekend celebrating.
To John, to Olivia, to our listeners, to Kaya, wherever she is.
She's celebrating already.
Yeah. We'll be back on Monday talking about some TV that we've missed over the last couple of months.
Mm-hmm.
Smoke is relatively recent. I think it'll already have 4 episodes out. I doubt we'll be talking about all of them, but we'll generally speak about that. That's on Apple TV.
Mm-hmm.
The Eternaut.
Eternaut?
We'll find out. Is on Netflix and is just kind of come recommended from a couple of different sources. People being like, "You guys check this out?
Mm-hmm.
Would you check this out?" And we're due an international sci-fi Netflix banger since Dark. And that
always feels good to find that.
It does. I'm sure we'll have some other observations from will no doubt be an eventless weekend in America.
They all are these days.
Thanks for listening and happy July 4th. We'll talk to you guys on Monday.